You're a trusted, highly skilled professional, part of a team protecting the safety and health of people served by the Mehlville Fire Protection District and the larger team of first responders caring for people across the United States. An important part of your duties is keeping health information private. That's basic to emergency health care, and it's required by a federal law called HIPAA. This training for the Mehlville Fire Protection District explains how HIPAA applies to emergency medical services. The HIPAA rules were written with the idea that healthcare providers work in controlled settings, like a hospital. But emergency medical services are the special forces of healthcare. Your first responders, working in the field, facing a wide variety of situations and patients every day. This training is specifically designed for you. It covers topics EMS professionals are most likely to see on a run. You'll learn how to assess a HIPAA privacy situation quickly and do the right thing, just like when you assess and treat a patient. You'll see that HIPAA rules are easy to follow, step by step, when you know the steps. The training has 5 modules. In Module 1, we'll look briefly at HIPAA basics. What is HIPAA? Why is HIPAA important? What do some key terms mean according to HIPAA? And we'll close by previewing the next modules that cover HIPAA in day-to-day EMS work with real-life examples. Let's get started. What is HIPAA? It is a federal law that sets national standards to protect the privacy and security of personal health information, your patient's health information, and your own health information. HIPAA law applies to what it calls covered entities. Healthcare providers are covered entities, and EMS professionals are healthcare providers, so you must follow HIPAA law. HIPAA is enforced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Justice, and the State Attorney General. Investigations usually start when a patient complains their privacy rights were violated, or if there is a violation called a breach. That is when someone gets your patient's information they're not allowed to have. HIPAA violations can bring civil money penalties like fines paid by your EMS organization. You also could be charged with a federal crime, but only if you steal medical identity to make money or publicly embarrass somebody. HIPAA doesn't allow patients to sue healthcare providers for HIPAA violations, but lawyers have filed malpractice cases charging that the failure to protect PHI violates a standard of care healthcare providers owe to patients. Why is HIPAA important? Yes, it's the law, but it's much, much more. Health information includes our most sensitive private information. The confidential relationship between healthcare providers and a patient is the bedrock of high-quality patient care. So HIPAA is about the quality of health care you provide. Patients trust you to treat them and trust you will keep their information safe. To treat a patient, you need truthful information that you won't get unless the patient trusts you. And unfortunately, it's also about risk. There are all kinds of people, good and bad. You see them every day. The bad, the criminals, have made medical identity theft a big, highly profitable business. Medical identity is the gold standard for identity thieves. This triggered massive public and private warning campaigns like this.
Many people know the dangers of having your identity stolen, but most people are unaware of the fastest growing form of identity theft. Medical identity theft occurs when someone steals or unlawfully uses your personal information like your name, social security number, or Medicare number.
Medicare fraud cannot be committed without 2 pieces of information: the identity of a provider and the identity of a patient.
That's important. With just the identity of a provider and identity of a patient, a thief contacts the patient, pretends to be a provider, and gets more information. It's called social engineering. The FBI explains partial medical identity of a person, your patient, you, your family, is worth $50 on the black market compared to $1 for a Social Security or credit card number, because it's used to commit health insurance fraud and get prescription medications. Identity thieves are everywhere, trying to steal health information about your patients. These are some key HIPAA terms: protected health information, or PHI, use, disclose, notice of privacy practices. Let's look at how the HIPAA rules define them. First, protected health information, or PHI. The definition of PHI starts with the definition of health information. Health information is information that describes the physical or mental health condition of an individual or the provision of health care to an individual that is created or received by a healthcare provider. In other words, it is information you create and receive beginning with your assessment of a patient. The definition of PHI continues with the definition of individually identifiable health information. That is health information, including information like a name that can be used to identify an individual. The HIPAA rules explain in detail exactly what kind of information can identify an individual. They are called identifiers. Here they are, 18 different types of identifying information, any one of which, tied to a patient's physical or mental health condition or provision of health care to the patient, is individually identifiable health information. And finally, PHI is individually identifiable health information transmitted by electronic media, any portable electronic device you use, like a laptop, maintained in electronic media, again, any electronic device you use, and transmitted or maintained in any other form or medium, like paper forms, records, or notes you make. Use and disclose. Use means using PHI within your EMS organization. Disclose means releasing or transferring PHI to anyone outside your EMS organization. EMS may use or disclose PHI only as permitted by HIPAA law. Notice of Privacy Practices, or NPP. An NPP explains to a patient how your EMS organization is permitted to use and disclose the patient's PHI, your EMS organization's legal duties concerning PHI, and the patient's rights concerning his or her PHI. Now let's look at the HIPAA topics covered in the next 4 training modules. Module 2 will cover the NPP. When EMS may disclose PHI will be covered in Module 3. Tips on avoiding HIPAA violations is the subject of Module 4, and we'll close with a brief discussion of how a national emergency or disaster affects EMS HIPAA compliance requirements in Module 5. So to wrap up, in Module 1, we have reviewed what HIPAA is, why HIPAA is important, key HIPAA terms for EMS professionals, and previewed the topics of upcoming HIPAA privacy and security training modules. When you finish this training, I think you'll see that for EMS professionals, HIPAA rules are easy to follow step by step when you know the steps. 2 final notes. Make sure you check with your HIPAA compliance official anytime you have a HIPAA question or concern. And, this is important, don't hesitate to report any possible HIPAA violation you see to your HIPAA compliance official. It may not be a violation. If it is, Corrective action may be taken and needed. It will be a much bigger problem if it is not reported and comes to the attention of the authorities later. And whether or not it is a violation, it can be a good learning point for your entire EMS organization. This concludes Module 1 of HIPAA Privacy and Security Training for EMS professionals. Welcome to Module 2 of HIPAA Privacy and Security Training for Emergency Medical Service Professionals. It's focused on HIPAA topics affecting your work as first responders, the special forces of healthcare. In Module 2, we'll take a closer look at your responsibilities concerning the Notice of Privacy Practices, or NPP. First, we'll do a quick review of what the NPP is. Next, we'll cover when you must provide a patient with the NPP and a best practice related to that rule to protect you and your patient. Then, we'll explain the HIPAA rule about the patient's receipt of the NPP and close with the importance of documentation. HIPAA is like middle school math. You have to show your work. What is the NPP? The NPP explains how your EMS organization may use and disclose PHI, your EMS organization's legal duties concerning PHI, and the patient's rights concerning his or her PHI. When does EMS provide the NPP? HIPAA requires a healthcare provider, your EMS organization, to provide the NPP on the first date a patient receives service from the organization. But as a practical matter, you may not know if a patient has already received your organization's NPP. So the best practice to make sure your organization follows this important HIPAA rule is to provide the NPP every time you provide service to a patient. In emergency treatment situations, the HIPAA rule is that you must provide the NPP as soon as you reasonably can. And a patient can request and has the right to receive a written copy of your organization's NPP at any time. Acknowledgement, receipt of the NPP. HIPAA requires you to make a good faith effort to provide the NPP and get a written acknowledgement from the patient that he or she received it. The important words are good faith effort. The written acknowledgement may be electronic if you have, for example, an electronic device where a patient can sign. Patients do not have to accept the NPP or give you a written acknowledgement of receipt. They have the absolute right to refuse. And the patient may not be conscious or otherwise unable to accept the NPP or acknowledge receipt. Documentation of HIPAA compliance is vital. It's the first thing a federal investigator will ask for. Confirm you provided the NPP on your ePCR or a form provided by your EMS organization. Record your good faith effort to get written acknowledgement the patient received the NPP. If necessary, make a record of how you provided the NPP to an unconscious patient, or that the patient refused to accept the NPP, or why you could not obtain a written acknowledgement of receipt of the NPP despite your good faith efforts. In Module 2, we've looked at HIPAA rules covering your organization's Notice of Privacy Practices. We reviewed what the NPP is, described the HIPAA rule about when to provide the NPP, and a best EMS practice to provide the NPP each time you treat a patient, considered issues concerning acknowledgement of receipt of the NPP by the patient. A patient can refuse to take the NPP and refuse to provide a written acknowledgement. And finally, the vital importance of making a record for documentation of your compliance or good faith efforts to comply with the HIPAA rules covering the NPP. You can see the HIPAA rules are easy to follow step by step when you know the steps. Remember, check with your HIPAA compliance official about any HIPAA questions or concerns and report any potential violation. This concludes Module 2 of HIPAA Privacy and Security Training for EMS professionals. Welcome to Module 3 of HIPAA Privacy and Security Training for Emergency Medical Service Professionals. In Module 3, we'll look at the HIPAA rules covering disclosure of PHI in real-life situations involving other healthcare providers, a patient's family or a person who is legitimately involved in caring for the patient, law enforcement and other legal authorities, and others like bystanders at an accident scene, neighbors, management of a business where an accident happened, and media who come to cover a story. Here is a special important rule about any disclosure of PHI by EMS. It's called the minimum necessary standard. The minimum necessary standard means you must limit the PHI you disclose about a patient to the minimum necessary PHI necessary to accomplish the purpose for the disclosure. And you may only disclose minimum necessary PHI to persons with a legitimate need to know permitted by HIPAA. Let's start with disclosures of your patient's PHI to other healthcare providers. These are disclosures of PHI for treatment. When you disclose PHI to another healthcare provider, like a receiving hospital, the minimum necessary standard does not apply. For treatment of a patient, healthcare providers need all PHI you can give them. What about the patient's family or other caregivers that are not family? Other caregivers may include a neighbor taking care of an elderly couple or the manager of an independent living facility. First, ask the patient if the family member or caregiver can be present and if you can talk to them. The patient has the right to agree or object to disclosing their PHI. Minimum necessary applies. If you disclose PHI, be sure it is necessary and limited. For example, the name of the hospital you will take the patient to. But the patient may be confused or unconscious and not able to agree or object. Then you can use your professional judgment to decide if it is in the patient's best interest to disclose PHI and how to meet the minimum necessary standard while doing so. Law enforcement, legal authorities. The minimum necessary standard and other HIPAA rules apply to disclosures to law enforcement. We'll look at some cases to explain the rules. Case 1, facts. Auto accident, patient, driver, tells EMS he has taken illegal drugs. Police officers are at the scene. Must EMS disclose to the officer what patient said about drug use? You're not required to tell the officer about this. Use your best professional judgment. Keep in mind the drug use information was given to you so you know an important fact you need to treat the patient. You may tell the officer if you believe it is right. We'll cover situations where you must tell the officer in a few minutes. Case 1, same facts. Police officer asks about the patient. Is he high? Question 2, may EMS disclose to the officer what patient said about drug use? Apply your best professional judgment in the situation. Yes, EMS may disclose the PHI if it is necessary to alert law enforcement of a crime or the location of a victim and the identity of a perpetrator. Case 1, same facts, and now the patient is in the ambulance. Case 1, Patient in ambulance. Question 3. Can EMS share patient drug PHI in ambulance with an EMS coworker? Yes. This is use of PHI within the EMS organization, not disclosure to a person outside the organization. Your EMS coworker needs to know PHI about drug use to treat the patient. Case 1. Same facts. You have transported the patient to the hospital. Question 4. Can EMS disclose to the hospital what the patient said about drug use? Yes. Hospital is a healthcare provider and needs to know PHI about drug use to treat the patient. Case 1. Add a new fact. The patient assaults EMS at the scene or in the ambulance and flees. Question 5. Can EMS disclose PHI about the patient to a police officer? Yes. The patient committed a crime and fled. You can disclose PHI to police so they can identify and locate a fugitive. But you are limited by HIPAA to specific minimum necessary PHI you can disclose for this purpose. It is only the individual's name, address, physical description, date and place of birth, social security number, blood type, date and time of treatment, and type of injury. You cannot disclose samples or an analysis of body fluids if you have them. Let's look at case 2. EMS responds to a convenience store. Patient was injured robbing store. The patient is under arrest. Patient tells EMS confidentially he is in methadone maintenance program. Question 1. Can and should EMS disclose to a police officer patient is in methadone maintenance program? Yes. Patient is in custody. Law enforcement needs to know PHI about methadone maintenance for the health and safety of patient while in custody. Case 2. Additional fact. Patient says he has taken an illegal drug that can cause dangerous aggressive behavior. Some examples are stimulants like cocaine, crack, or meth. Question 2. Can and should EMS disclose to police officer that patient has taken this type of drug? Yes. Law enforcement needs to know this PHI for the safety of officers dealing with the patient in custody. Let's look at case 3. EMS responds to a parked automobile. Driver reported to be unconscious. Driver tells EMS he is diabetic, has just taken glucose pills, and will drive away soon. Patient refuses to let EMS take him to hospital. Question. Can EMS call law enforcement and disclose PHI for police to take action like escorting patient to the hospital? Yes. EMS may disclose minimum necessary PHI about a patient if EMS believes the disclosure is necessary to prevent or lessen a serious or imminent threat to the health or safety of the patient, another person, or the public. It's not safe for the patient to drive. In case 4, EMS is treating a patient with serious head injury from a fall, and the patient needs to be taken to a hospital. But the patient is high on meth and refuses to let EMS take her to the hospital. Question. Can EMS call law enforcement and disclose PHI for police to take action, like escorting patient to the hospital? Yes. A different situation from case 3, but the same HIPAA rule applies. EMS may disclose minimum necessary PHI about a patient if EMS believes the disclosure is necessary to prevent or lessen a serious or imminent threat to the health or safety of the patient, another person, or the public, and this patient clearly must be treated for her own health and safety. Now, case 5. EMS responds to residents where patient is reported injured in a fall. Patient tells EMS she was injured in a fall. Patient's injuries are not consistent with a fall, but are consistent with severe beating. Question 1. Can and should EMS disclose PHI about the patient's injuries and circumstances indicating abuse to the hospital? Yes. The hospital is a healthcare provider. The minimum necessary standard does not apply. Hospital must have all available information to provide proper care for the patient. Continuing with the facts of case 5. Question 2. Can EMS disclose PHI about a patient EMS reasonably believes to be a victim of abuse, neglect, or domestic violence to law enforcement and legal authorities? Yes. EMS may disclose PHI about a patient EMS reasonably believes to be a victim of abuse, neglect, or domestic violence to law enforcement and legal authorities, including social and protective service agencies authorized by law to receive such reports. When you suspect or see victims of abuse, neglect, or domestic violence, the best practice is, first, care for your patient's immediate health needs. If you transport the patient to a hospital, make sure hospital staff is aware of your observation of the nature of patient's injuries. And finally, report your observations through your EMS chain of command for appropriate action in alerting law enforcement and legal authorities. Now let's consider others who might be present when you're treating a patient, like bystanders, management of a business, and the media. Bystanders at an accident or nosy neighbors try to ask questions about the patient's condition. Question 1. Can EMS answer bystander neighbor questions? Answer. No. They are not authorized to receive PHI from you. HIPAA requires you to protect the patient's PHI and not disclose it to unauthorized persons. A bystander or neighbor takes photos or video of patient at scene. A photo is a HIPAA identifier. Question 2. Does HIPAA law prevent bystander neighbor from taking photos or video of patient? No, because HIPAA law doesn't apply to bystanders or neighbors. And this is also important. You have no responsibility to try and stop them. You respond to a business where your patient is a customer who was injured in a fall there. You have the patient in the ambulance for transport. Store manager asks EMS for information about patient, may even knock on your window as you're about to drive away. Question: can EMS answer store manager's questions? No. Store managers are not authorized to receive PHI from you. It was the store manager's job to get information from the patient earlier. You may not disclose PHI to the store manager, including the patient's name. HIPAA requires you to protect patients' PHI. That means not disclosing it to someone like the store manager who's not authorized to get it from you like this. Media. Media comes to the scene to cover a story and ask you questions about the patient. Question 1. Can you answer media questions? Answer: no. The media is not authorized to receive PHI from you. HIPAA requires you to protect patients' PHI and not disclose it to unauthorized persons. Media takes photos or video of patient at scene. Question 2. Does HIPAA law prevent media from taking photos and video of patient at scene? No. HIPAA law doesn't apply to the media and does not prevent them from taking pictures. And HIPAA does not require you to try and stop them. In Module 3, we've looked at HIPAA rules covering disclosures of PHI in your work as EMS professionals regarding other healthcare providers, a patient's family or caregiver, law enforcement and other legal authorities, and others like bystanders, businesses, and the media. And always remember to check with your HIPAA compliance official about any HIPAA questions or concerns, and report any potential violation. This concludes Module 3 of HIPAA Privacy and Security Training for EMS professionals. Welcome to Module 4 of HIPAA Privacy and Security Training for Emergency Medical Service Professionals. In Module 4, we'll look at situations that can happen every day, might cause a HIPAA violation, and how to prevent violations. We'll cover issues related to the physical security of PHI you create, receive, maintain, or transmit, electronic devices used in your EMS work, the proper use of PHI in photos and videos with some examples that caused problems for EMS, and we'll cover what are called incidental uses or disclosures of PHI and are permitted by the HIPAA privacy rule. Let's start with physical security of PHI. Here is where you're going to do some homework. Homework you can and should do together. Remember, PHI is health information that can identify an individual and is maintained or transmitted in any form or medium. Here's your homework question. Where is the PHI you maintain or transmit? Where is it physically kept? Here are some suggestions for doing your homework. First, make a list of all places you keep or transmit a patient's PHI. For example, do you use electronic devices? What are they? Where are they? Are they secured when you're not holding them? Do you use paper forms, reports, or logs provided by your EMS organization? What and where are they? Are they secured when you're not using them? Do you make notes containing PHI to help you do a better job? Do you use your own personal electronic device in your work? For example, take photos with your phone. Is there any other place you keep PHI or other way you transmit it? Here are some examples that might help you. Second, for everything on your list, consider how PHI may be at risk. For example, could someone steal an electronic device or paper records from your vehicle? How do you keep track of things so you don't lose them? If you have PHI on your phone, what do you do with it when you turn it in for an upgrade? Do you put paper containing PHI in the wastebasket when you're finished using it? And third, how do you keep items on your list safe? For example, are the electronic devices you use encrypted, password protected, and in a safe, secure place when you're not using them? Are electronic devices, including your own, completely wiped, sanitized before they're disposed of or exchanged? Is paper secured when you're not using it and shredded before disposal? Always keep in mind, medical identity theft is a serious, rapidly growing, widespread criminal business. Now let's look more closely at electronic devices. Consider electronic devices provided by the EMS organization. Do you keep personal data on them or use them for either EMS or personal email and texting? Do you take photos and videos of patients for treatment reasons? Do you keep patient PHI of any kind on your own personal device? We saw the FBI warning about medical identity theft by criminals in Module 1. It's growing worse every day. Criminals use email and the internet, tricks called phishing and malicious advertising, to steal all kinds of information. It's called social engineering, ways to get you to click on a link that infects your device with criminal software. And it's not just aimed at PHI maintained by your EMS organization. They'll take anything they can get, including your personal information. Let's see some examples and how you can identify and avoid these attacks at work and at home. This is a copy of a real email, a good example of social engineering. They want you to react fast without thinking. Oh my gosh, who wants their Netflix account suspended? But look at the sender. That's not Netflix. Phishing emails often have bad grammar and punctuation, no question mark. A clickable link is always a red flag. So is any request for credit card information like this one. Here's another from A, small t and small t. That's the first warning sign. Mouse over the sender's name, making sure not to click. You can see it's a fake sender, not AT&T. Here's another kind of trick. Criminals use social media to find out where you work and send an email that looks like it comes from your employer. It's called spoofing. Addressed to you, that's called spear phishing, with a clickable link that can infect your device and a fake security note to get you to turn over your login credentials. Pop-ups look legitimate, using logos you know that seem legitimate. This is called malicious advertising or malvertising, and generally tries to hook you in two ways. You're in danger, or hey, you've got a lucky break. With one click, you can be the victim of the most popular extortion scam on the internet today, ransomware. When you're using any device, always think before you click, whether it's your EMS laptop, your phone, or your home computer. Now let's look at photos, videos, and other PHI-like information about how the patient was injured. You may disclose photos, videos, and information about an injury without the patient's authorization for treatment. An ER doc might want to see photos to understand the injury better. You may use this PHI without patient authorization within your EMS organization to provide treatment, or for what is called healthcare operations, things like training and assessing and improving your EMS service. A patient may be injured because he sawed off a tree limb he was sitting on. That makes for a good story, but you may not disclose or use that PHI for storytelling, gossip at work, gossip at home, gossip with friends, or on social media. Remember, PHI is information related to healthcare or condition for which there is a reasonable basis to believe the information can be used to identify the individual. Social media routinely causes problems for healthcare providers. Here's an example. An EMT posted a murder victim's picture on his own Facebook page. He lost his job, license, and was convicted of official misconduct. Here's another. A paramedic posted a photo and comments about his patient on Instagram. He and his employer were sued, and after 2 years, the suit was settled and sealed. Court filings indicate it went badly for both the paramedic and the EMS organization. In this case, a paramedic posted information about a sexual assault victim, didn't name the patient, but posted enough information for the media to identify her. The paramedic and the EMS organization are defending the resulting lawsuit. And consider the damage to the reputations of everybody involved. In Maryland, EMS postings of PHI on social media caused the Attorney General to send a strict warning to the state's EMS providers. To finish this module, we'll look at what are called incidental uses or disclosures of PHI that are permitted by HIPAA. An incidental use or disclosure of PHI can happen when you're following HIPAA and something unexpected happens, like a bystander hears what a patient tells you. Incidental uses or disclosures of PHI are permitted by the HIPAA privacy rule if reasonable safeguards are in place and the minimum necessary standard is followed. You can't prevent every incidental disclosure, especially in the field. Do your best to apply reasonable safeguards. Use your judgment. Assess the scene. What is the situation? Who is there? Who do you need to do to treat the patient? Speak and listen quietly to the patient, privately if possible. Follow the minimum necessary standard. Ask and say only what you need to. In a situation where there are two patients in the ambulance, be aware that both can probably hear and see what is done. Speak and listen quietly. Ask and say only what you need to. But of course, carry on. Do what you must to treat the patient. In dealing with incidental uses and disclosures, use your best professional judgment, bring them up in training as case studies, discuss the circumstances and possible solutions, open up for suggestions, identify best practices, revise and improve your EMS organization's guidelines. It's about focus on continuous improvement. It's about being better every day. In Module 4, we've looked at some specific situations that could lead to HIPAA violations by EMS professionals and how to avoid violations in those situations. We've covered issues related to the physical security of PHI you create, receive, maintain, or transmit, electronic devices used in your EMS work, the proper use of PHI in photos and videos, and incidental uses or disclosures of PHI that are permitted by the HIPAA privacy rule. You've been given homework in Module 4. Homework you can do together, issues you can discuss and think about, find ways to handle situations better, so when you face a HIPAA challenge, you'll be ready, confident that you know the HIPAA rule that applies and what steps to follow. And always remember to check with your HIPAA compliance official about any HIPAA questions or concerns and report any violation. This concludes Module 4 of HIPAA Privacy and Security Training for EMS professionals. Welcome to Module 5 of HIPAA Privacy and Security Training for Emergency Medical Service Professionals. This is the final module of your HIPAA Privacy and Security Training. In Module 5, we'll look at how emergency medical services are affected during a national emergency or disaster. First, we'll explain what a national emergency or disaster is. Then we'll identify the few HIPAA provisions that are suspended during a national emergency or disaster. And finally, we'll review important considerations for special needs patients. What is a national emergency or disaster under federal law? A national emergency or disaster may be declared by the President. A public health emergency may be declared by the Secretary, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. Both require a formal, official declaration in compliance with federal law. Examples are Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria in 2017. In a declared emergency, certain HIPAA provisions may be temporarily suspended. During a public health emergency, the HHS Secretary has the authority to suspend certain HIPAA provisions by making a formal waiver of those provisions. The waiver may be made at the beginning of an emergency or after it begins, but be made retroactive to the beginning. If the Secretary waives HIPAA provisions, the waiver is effective only in the specific geographical area covered by the emergency declaration and is in effect only during time a declaration of emergency exists. This is the HIPAA waiver issued for Hurricane Harvey. It was limited to the states of Texas and Louisiana that had been declared disaster areas by the President. In a public health emergency, the suspension of HIPAA rules is very limited, and the HIPAA privacy rule is not suspended. PHI must be protected. The minimum necessary standard remains in effect. EMS must limit PHI disclosed to the minimum necessary to accomplish the purpose of the disclosure, and EMS may disclose minimum necessary PHI only to persons with lawful need to know. These are the HIPAA provisions that can be waived. Requirements for EMS about the distribution of a notice of privacy practices are suspended. EMS does not have to obtain a patient's agreement to speak with family members or friends involved in the patient's care. A patient's right to request EMS restrict uses or disclosures of their PHI to carry out treatment, payment, or healthcare operations is suspended. A patient's right to request he or she receive communications of PHI from EMS by alternative means or at an alternative locations is suspended. And patients may not request to opt out of being publicly listed in a hospital's directory. Special needs patients always need special care from EMS. The 2017 hurricanes prompted HHS to issue updated guidance emphasizing the important considerations for emergency health care of special needs patients. Persons with special health care needs in an emergency include children, elderly persons, persons from diverse cultural origins, and individuals with disabilities. EMS must be prepared to care for special needs patients at risk in an emergency, and they include individuals with limited English, persons living in institutionalized settings, and persons without transportation. In these situations, EMS must be ready to serve locations and issues of special needs patients. Communicate with your chain of command to be prepared to accommodate issues related to mobility and service animals, and be aware of arrangements for translators, interpreters for deaf, and the location of available shelters. In Module 5, we've looked at how emergency medical services are affected during a national emergency or disaster, what a national emergency or disaster is, what few HIPAA provisions may be suspended during a national emergency or disaster, and finally, we've reviewed important considerations for special needs patients. You can see that for EMS, HIPAA rules are easy to follow step by step when you know the steps. And your HIPAA compliance official is there to help you anytime you have a HIPAA question or concern. Don't hesitate to report any possible HIPAA violation you see to your HIPAA compliance official. This training has covered HIPAA rules that apply to your day-to-day work as EMS professionals in situations you are most likely to run into. You are the first responders, the special forces of healthcare. Knowing and following these HIPAA rules is an important part of the quality of your work, the quality of care you provide for patients, and the quality of your entire EMS organization. This concludes Module 5 of HIPAA Privacy and Security Training for EMS Professionals.